The main objective, as I see it, is to be a part of the solution. Excessive description without analytical insights into what is wrong and therefore what is the way out of the problem actually makes such analysis somewhat debilitating. And that, I think, is true with this country. Umpteen number of speeches and columns we read and we hear about and we listen to with great respect and attention, hoping that they will be actually light at the end of the tunnel. And most of the time we go back with great sense of depression. It's almost as if we take a perverse pleasure in a very tragic and very somber and an extremely distressing and depressing mood, and in making people feel terrible about our country and our situation. Somehow I cannot share that approach at all. I believe public discourse is about public reasoning. Public reasoning is about improving institutions and quality of life, and that necessarily has to be founded on a sense of hope, because there is nothing in my life that I have seen which is shorn of hope. Individually, we all are raised to many tragedies. There's not a human being who has not faced tragedies, as Lord Buddha himself discovered. That is the very condition of the human being. That is the very predicament of the human condition. There's no escape from that. There is inevitably going to be unavoidable suffering. That is the nature of the human beings. But collectively as a society, if we take a broader view, there is enormous scope for hope. That's what history tells us. That's what contemporary history tells us. That's what our own society tells us. That's what the global society tells us. When we want to examine probity, I submit that it has to examine in a broader context, not merely as corruption or lack of it. If all you can say about certain public individuals who spent a lifetime in public office is that this gentleman or lady was honest, never took a bribe, and nothing else, I would feel extremely distressed. There are many people who were men and women of unimpeachable personal integrity in that sense, but who made no contribution whatsoever to public good. I can count any number of people in politics and in bureaucracy and in judiciary. I'm not impressed by such integrity. Therefore, I would like to examine probity from 3 points of view. The first is the regime corruption itself. If there is institutional failure, and if these worthy and honest individuals were incapable of arresting the drift, if they were not a part of the solution, while they might not be personally corrupt, to me there is regime corruption involved. If Mrs. Gandhi imposed emergency without any valid reason whatsoever, violating all canons of democracy and parliamentary practice and cabinet collective responsibility, and as subsequent events have proved, there was not even a cabinet resolution in favor of imposition of emergency. There cannot be anything more grotesque than that. And if we say because she did not take any money from anybody, in that case, that was a perfectly honorable and honest act, there's something desperately wrong with our public discourse and public reasoning. That was a grotesque act of public probity, a grotesque act of regime corruption. If there are more than 100 cases of imposition of emergency, and in this case the President's rule and Article 356 of the Constitution, because the constitutional machinery was allegedly a failure in these states, and in about 95 of those occasions it was always the case that the party in power in the state was in opposition to that in power in the Union. It is such a remarkable coincidence, and if we accept that there was no corruption because the governor of the day or the prime minister of the day or the president of the day did not accept a bribe in money terms, that is an act of public probity, I think it's an act of disgrace. I think there is regime corruption which is much more dangerous than merely acceptance of money. I am, of course, by no means condoning acceptance of money, but I'm trying to make us realize that democratic behavior and institutional probity is of a much higher order than merely accepting or not accepting money. And we can multiply these examples. I remember a very distinguished set of officials, by the way, some of them, in fact all of them are my great personal friends even today. They were examining a particular issue. For obvious reasons, I would not like to mention the incident because then that will reveal the identity. My intention is not to embarrass my very dear friends because they are very honorable men indeed. They were examining a particular issue, and they were all men of great personal integrity, beyond reproach. This was in relation to a particular organization. And they were so terribly indecisive because they wanted to prove to the world that they were men of probity. And if you took a decision, people could attribute motives. In a democratic society, any firm and tough decision is prone to public response, public reaction. And even the most honorable person's motives could be questioned. And it is, of course, embarrassing. It is very hurtful, particularly when you're honorable and honest. But lacking the courage to take the right decision in public interest is not particularly honorable in my judgment. And these gentlemen actually failed. And the net result for the state at that time was probably 100 times more than if somebody else who had the courage to take a decision took a small bribe and then took the right decision. I remember another occasion of a completely different kind where a colleague of mine in government took a bribe of 8 lakh rupees, and the damage he had done to the institutions in Andhra Pradesh in that particular sector is lasting even today. This happened about 12 years ago. I remember in my anger going to him and telling him, if you had asked me for that bribe, I would have probably paid that to you. If only you were willing to take 1 lakh rupees more from me, 9 lakh rupees, and then do the right thing, because the damage you had done is infinitely greater than the money you had collected. I cannot forgive you for that. And if indeed in that case he had taken 10 lakh rupees from somebody else and did the right thing, I would have actually respected him much more. Though 10 lakh rupees in that judgment is more dishonest than 8 lakh rupees. The point I'm trying to make is that there is something called regime corruption, which we cannot ignore. Interference in crime investigation, distorting the democratic processes, causing breakdown of rule of law. These are issues of fundamental importance to the future of the nation itself, and of course imposition of emergency in curbing the freedoms in this society, in our country. There's of course a second, a much lower order issue of accountability. You may be personally very honest. I remember one of my officials, when I was holding a district charge, this chap was absolutely above reproach. There was not a single complaint in 2.5 years against him. No politician, no member of the public ever made a complaint against him. And I used to receive about 1,000 visitors a day. And therefore my eyes and ears were always open, and I had tremendous amount of feedback. Not one person complained against this official serving in an interior mandal, until my immediate junior colleague, a sub-collector, he visited his office to inspect one day, and he found an amazing thing. Every month this official was sending me and my office monthly reports on all the parameters in the conference of revenue officers we used to have. And as long as my office received those reports, as far as we are concerned, if there's no complaint from any quarter, he was doing a good job. But that apart, he never even looked at the mail from the government, from the collector, and from the public. He very faithfully bundled them and put them somewhere in the storage space. 6 months unopened mail was found in the storage space, and there was not a single complaint from the public, from any quarter. That is the level of expectation of the people from our public officials in this country. If the fellow does not harass or humiliate or extort money, if he does nothing, if he simply collects his salary every month and goes back home, people are perfectly happy. And if you say that that is not an act of corruption, I would say there's something wrong with our heads. There is an issue of accountability here. Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Am I discharging my duties? Forget the larger, greater constitutional honor and propriety. And I'm afraid by that yardstick, a large number of professionals in government, if you call them professionals at all, I'm using that word for want of a better choice of word, I'm afraid they certainly fall in our esteem when we measure them by the standard of probity. And of course the third one is pretty straightforward, the legal definition of corruption. An illegal consideration for a decision taken or not taken, for action or inaction, for an act of omission or commission. It's a very straightforward one. And that of course is what is culpable. That's what our Prevention of Corruption Act talks about, That's what our criminal laws of the land talk about. That's what all of us discuss endlessly. But I suspect we have to actually go a little beyond and discuss and examine at least the larger aspects.